right now in the world of the UFC, things are just not looking good, man, in 2025. Things as of this very moment are just not looking good for this year. And the reason I bring that up is look, a lot of us coming into the year, I felt like this was going to be a really big year for the UFC, right? We have not exactly the big superstars like we used to have, but we still have some big names. I think things are a lot more evenly distributed, and we have some mega fights that are potentially on the horizon that the UFC seems like they are struggling to get these fights to actually happen, right? So in this video, I want to talk about a variety of different topics. I want to talk about the current state of the UFC, some of the big matchups that they are struggling to book. I'll give my thoughts there. And all this just what I'm calling duck fuckery going on at lightweight right now. I mean, what a disaster the lightweight division is, which we'll discuss. I'll play matchmaker, see how we can fix that. And then I'm going to talk about some other things, right? The star issue in the UFC, because I have a very interesting take when it comes to what is going on in terms of this star issue that everyone keeps mentioning when it comes to the UFC. And then we will wrap up by talking about Dana White, because Dana White is someone, obviously, I know most of us really like Dana White, right? What he's done for the UFC and all these different things, but he's almost became like a Joe Rogan, right? Where Dana's an OG, he's been around for a while, and he's doing all these different things outside of the UFC right now that I think have him very distracted to where he's almost not as in touch with the UFC anymore, and definitely not in touch what the current fan base is actually looking for. So we're going to address all of this in this video. I'll put the time codes down below, but let's first start with the duck fuckery, as I'm calling it, going on at lightweight. We have a disaster at lightweight right now, and I do want to mention this, right? I have this quoted here because a lot of people, you ask them, what's the best division in the UFC, man? What's the best division? They're going to say, but lightweight is the best division in the UFC. I call bullshit. I've been saying it for the longest time. Look, I do believe that the lightweight division obviously has some huge names, right? Islam Makhachev, Ilia Topuria, those are the two best fighters in the UFC right now. Number one, Islam. Number two, Ilia Topuria. That's how I think it should be in terms of pound for pound. That's how I at least look at it. Those are the two best and biggest names, in my opinion, in the UFC right now. The guys that are active, the guys that are making it happen, those are the two guys. That is a mega fight. That is the biggest fight that the UFC, in my opinion, can put together right now. And I know a lot of us want that to happen. But this notion that the lightweight division is the best, I know it has Islam and it has Ilia Topuria. Yes, we have Gaethje, Poirier. We have the big name fan favorites. When you look around at bantamweight, you look around even at featherweight, middleweight, I mean, these divisions are on absolute fire right now. We have contenders all over the place. We got prospects that aren't even in the rankings that are guys that are going to be the future of the division. So to say that lightweight is the best, I know it has some of the bigger names and entertaining guys. I don't think it's the best division, right? I know that we have Arman and Oliveira. We have some really good fighters and some big names, and I understand the star power that it brings. In terms of star power, I'd say yes. But in terms of like the best division right now, I'm just not so sure, right? I think that we need to pump the brakes a little bit there. But I want to talk about what's going on here with Ilia versus Islam, because this is absolutely driving me batshit crazy right now. And I think it's important to note this. Not that long ago, Ariel Helwani came out and he said, look, Islam Makhachev versus Ilia Topuria is planned for as early as June. Now, I know what you're thinking, at least some of you, you're going to say, well, Jake, who gives a shit what Ariel Helwani says? And I'm kind of with you, right? Ariel Helwani gets on my last nerve. But the point is, he's been in the game for such a long time. He has sources all over the place. I know he's basically like blackballed by the UFC. We get all that. But he's still a very reliable source for the most part. He has eyes and ears everywhere and people feeding him information. And I know that there was this notion going around, is the UFC feeding information to Ariel to get him to break news on things that aren't true? I'm just not so sure about that. When Ariel delivers something and tells us something, he's usually heard from a pretty credible source, right? So to hear this, I feel like we all kind of had the idea when Dana's like hinting about all these big fights, we kind of had a feeling that it just might be this matchup right here. Now, we have some issues. we have some issues because this is the best fight that the UFC can make right now. Without question, this is a massive fight. Ilia Topuria, we already know how good he is. He's undefeated. He's coming off a KO win over Volkanovski, a KO win over Max Holloway. Might be the greatest back-to-back win streak in UFC history. It's definitely up there. It's incredibly impressive what the guy has done. And then Islam Makhachev, he's the number one pound-for-pound guy in the sport. He is the GOAT lightweight, and he is evolving every single time we see him out there. These are, without question, this is a badass fight. It's a huge, huge, huge fight. We all know that. But something's going on behind the scenes, and we know that obviously, Ilia Topuria, he wants this fight. And on the other side, we have Islam Makhachev, who Islam has always been a guy that is going to take on the next challenge the UFC gives him. He's not someone that says no. They offer him Volkanovski, they offer him whoever, he will accept the fight. That's just how Islam is, right? And we know that. So to say that he is ducking a fight with Ilia Topuria, I don't believe that that is the correct assessment. Now, when you look at what has been coming from Islam's team, right? It's reported, he's turned down a fight with Ilia Topuria. Islam has not agreed to this fight. He maintains the position that Topuria needs to earn a title shot at 155 per Makhachev's team. So the team of Islam is basically out there saying, we need to see Ilia do something at 155 before we give him a title shot. So it's not exactly Islam saying that, right? Because I believe if the UFC said, look, Islam, this is who you're fighting next, I believe that he would take the fight, sign the contract, and we would have this fight. I think that this is Islam's team saying, look, we want to see Ilia come up to the weight class. He vacated his title. He's moving up. Yes, what he's done is very impressive. Let's see what he can do at 155 pounds against a top contender to earn the title shot. Because you have to remember, even when Max Holloway was doing some impressive things, Islam was like, look, if he moves up and he does something impressive in the division and he shows us something and earns his opportunity, I have no problem giving it to him. That's just kind of how they have worked in terms of giving title opportunities. But we have all this bullshit going on. The fight to make is Ilia versus Islam, man. And I know people are going to say, well, Islam, he's going to be fighting another featherweight. Ilia Topuria is going to be dedicating a move up to lightweight. He has vacated the title, so he essentially has nothing to do with featherweight anymore. And I have been saying for months, that would be the biggest win of Islam's career, and it would do more for his resume than a win against anybody else. The only other argument would be a win over Arman in the rematch. That's it. Ilia versus Islam is a massive fight, and it's a badass fight, man. It's a badass fight. The boxing of Topuria, the aura, Islam Makhachev's aura, like just the way it comes together, it's a mega fight, without question. We have this fuckery going on to where we got Javier Mendez saying, they would welcome the idea of Islam versus Justin Gaethje, man. Like, nobody wants to see that. Justin Gaethje, like him and Poirier, as much as we love them, and I feel like we all like these guys, they can't just lose a fight, come back, win one, and then we just give them title shots. They've already fought for the belt so many times, and we have Arman waiting in the wings, and I know, believe me, Arman went out there and kind of blew his opportunity because, basically 24 hours before the fight, he's got a back injury, he, can't make it happen. So enter Renato Moicano. I get the frustration, and we all know how the UFC is going to handle this, most likely. They're going to strong-arm Arman. They're going to be like, you blew your opportunity. You're going to need to fight a contender first before we give you another opportunity after you essentially butchered the, UFC 311, right? And I know we still had Umar versus Merab, which basically saved it. But, so it's a big deal. In the UFC, we know how they are when it comes to this. But then we have, Charles Oliveira, right? And again, this is coming from Chael, so who exactly knows? But he's basically saying that Charles will only fight Ilia if Ilia has the title. So now we have Ilia, who's like, okay, if I can't get the Islam fight, I want to fight a top contender in the division. But then we hear Ilia, he's like, I don't want to fight Arman. Charles, according to Chael, doesn't want to fight Ilia. So we have all these guys, Gaethje and Poirier are like buddies. They don't want to fight. We have all these guys who don't want to fight each other, whether they're buddies or just whatever the hell's going on. This division is becoming an absolute shit show right now. It's becoming a shit show, and it's becoming super frustrating because there are very straightforward matchups, and getting the matchups booked should be very easy on the end of the UFC. And this notion of Justin Gaethje getting a title shot, look, Justin Gaethje's a legend, one of the most exciting fighters in UFC history. Nobody is taking anything away from him. And by the way, I don't even know if this was a tweet by him, right? We know his manager is Ali. Maybe Ali put this out there. I won 3 out of my last 4, only losing in an exhibition fight. I have to fight for the belt. At Dana White, I'm ready. No. Just know, man, you went out there and you beat Rafael Fiziev on short notice. And I know that that's not Gaethje's fault. He was preparing for Hooker. He still was able to stay on the card and win a fight. And I get that. And it's still an impressive win because Fiziev is a talented guy. But we can't just do this like just a fight ago. Before that, he got flatlined by Holloway and was getting touched up the entire fight. Ilia Topuria just KO'd Holloway. Right? We can't just do this where Justin Gaethje, Poirier, Chandler, these guys win a fight and then it's like, oh, they got a big win. Well, let's give them a title shot. Like, we can't keep doing that. And this is the trickle-down effect of what is happening inside the UFC right now. We get these guys who, yes, they have name value, and we know the UFC wants to push them and give them these big opportunities. But we've gotten away, or the UFC has gotten away, from having the actual deserving contender fight for the title next, right? For the first time in how long has it been, we had Alex Pereira take on Magomed Ankalaev, who was clearly the number 1 guy in the division. Look how good that fight was. Look how interesting that matchup was. It had so many people going, how's this fight play out, man? This is such a close fight, such an interesting fight. That's what we get when the number 1 guy fights the champion. That's why the rankings and stuff was set up the way it was. So the best at the time fight the best. That's the point. That's what the UFC's always spun it off of, man, is the best fight the best. That has always been the thing, and it just doesn't seem like it is happening as much. And Dana talks about all these different things that just don't happen. And he sits up there and he says, UFC 300, it's going to be unbelievable. It's going to be spectacular. And I mean, don't get me wrong, UFC 300 was pretty good, but he sets the bar so high and then delivers down here. And it just sets us up for such disappointment to where it's almost created this untrustworthy relationship from the UFC and the fan base right now. Am I wrong? Like, feel free to tell me if I'm wrong, but I feel like that's how a lot of us feel. And listen, Islam Makhachev, he is someone that he's as far as I'm concerned, you know, him and Khabib are the 2 greatest lightweights of all time. And what Islam has done, especially the wins over Volkanovski, he's sensational. I'm looking at him as the GOAT lightweight at this point. He's in a position to where he can basically just do what he wants, right? If he wants to go up to 170, he can do that. If he wants to fight Ilia, he can do that. If he wants to fight, like, that's kind of how this goes. But make no mistake about it. Whoever the UFC sits down with a piece of paper and says, this is who we want you to fight, I believe Islam fights that guy. There's a lot of chatter going on. Maybe a lot of this stuff is negotiation tactics. Who knows? But it's the fuckery going on at lightweight that is driving me nuts. It's like no one wants to fight. It's like, you know, Islam is going to fight whoever they give him. But Ilia is like, I don't want to fight Arman. According to Chael, Oliveira doesn't want to fight Topuria. Poirier, Gaethje. Like, it's a disaster right now. It's a disaster. We have to get it solved. And so that leads me to this, right? Before I get into some of the matchmaking pieces. This is a mega fight. Islam versus Ilia is a mega fight. We all know that. It doesn't take anyone with a brain, really, in terms of MMA, to know this is a massive fight. All you have to do is look at the numbers. Ilia Topuria on social media has exploded, right? This guy's over in Spain. He's showing up at Real Madrid games. He's got Sergio Ramos pulling up to his fights. This guy's a star. Without question, he's a star. And Islam Makhachev, he's over 10 million now on Instagram, right? So he is clearly one of the faces, if not the face, you could make the argument, of the UFC at present. 2 massive names, the 2 best guys in the sport. It gives me shades of a McGregor-Khabib type of matchup. And I believe that the UFC smells that as well, right? It's not going to have this nasty buildup, I don't think, anything like McGregor and Khabib, because McGregor's an absolute piece of shit, to where Ilia is one of those guys that he knows what to say to build the fight, but I don't think that he and Islam are going to cross any type of lines, right? Maybe they'll say something about Georgia and Russia and that kind of stuff, but they're not going to do what McGregor did. I don't think, at least, Ilia would. So the point is, it's a competitive fight. These guys understand how to market. They understand how to get it intrigued. I smell the biggest fight that we have seen in a while between these two. It's the biggest fight. It's the best fight they can book. Book the damn fight, man. It's a mega fight. Get it done. How do we fix 155 pounds, right? Daniel Cormier recently was saying this is what he would like to see at lightweight. Islam versus Ilia, Arman versus Gaethje, Poirier versus Oliveira 2. Now, I don't agree with much of what he's saying here in terms of the matchmaking. I just think that this is bad matchmaking here by Daniel Cormier. But again, it's his opinion. It's what he would like to see. I don't agree with what he would like to see. Okay. And again, the lightweight division, we have all these big names. We have a lot of guys that have already fought each other. To me, it's very straightforward. You do Islam versus Topuria or Islam versus Arman, right? That is the only options, in my opinion, at lightweight for Islam right now is an Ilia Topuria fight, which is the biggest fight in the sport, or you rebook the Arman versus Islam matchup. And I know the UFC is going to try to, make an example out of Arman by not giving him the opportunity. And I get it. I can smell it a mile away. I'm sure you can too. It's a big fight. It's a huge fight. It's huge for the legacy of Islam at this point. That's what he's fighting for. A win over Justin Gaethje, what does that do? No one's really going to pick Gaethje to win that fight. Of course, it's a fight. Anything could happen. Islam probably either hurts him on the feet, takes him down and subs him, or just flat out KOs him, right? So that it's basically a pretty easy win for Islam. In terms of legacy, yes, adding Gaethje to his resume is impressive, but a win over the current Arman that we're seeing and in a prime Ilia Topuria who's undefeated, those are the only two fights, right? But I think it's interchangeable to where if Islam fights Ilia or Arman, those are the options. And whoever doesn't get the Islam fight fights Charles Oliveira. So you could do the Arman Oliveira rematch, or you give Ilia the number one contender fight and have him fight a Charles Oliveira. Badass fights, no matter how they go down. Those are badass fights. And then these down here are interchangeable as well. But I think that they should run back Poirier versus Max Holloway, right? And I know Holloway just got finished by Topuria. That was at 45, right? Remember, he came up to 55, had one of the best performances of his career against Justin Gaethje. Give him the Poirier rematch. Or you could give him Dan Hooker or something like that. But to me, Gaethje and Poirier don't sound like they want to fight each other, at least Gaethje, right? They kind of have this friendly relationship going on. I know Holloway and Poirier are cool. Poirier says he has one more fight, wants to fight New Orleans, wants to legends only type of thing. Max Holloway is absolutely a legend. They have some history. It would be a very fun fight. I know a Gaethje rematch would be cool as well for Poirier. That fight makes sense. Whether they put the BMF title on the line, that would kind of be their pitch to be able to make it a pay-per-view. And then you get Gaethje versus Hooker back on the books. I know Hooker got hurt. He had to pull out. And yeah, you kind of missed your opportunity to fight a big name in Justin Gaethje. Big opportunity here for Dan Hooker to get it done again. And this would be a massive fight. We all know what we're going to get, which is pure violence. It's a huge fight. And the winner of that one, if Gaethje can win another one, Hooker can go out there, get an impressive win, they put themselves right in the conversation for after whatever happens at the top of the division, with an Ilia Arman getting an Islam fight. It creates some opportunity. But either way, they got to get this sorted out. Lightweight is an absolute disaster right now. And again, look at these fighters. Great fighters at lightweight. But all these guys are like fan favorites, right? They're all big names. But we gotta figure out the matchmaking. We gotta figure out the matchmaking because it's driving me nuts. And I know it's driving a lot of us nuts. Now, Aspinall versus Jones. I've been up here saying for the longest time, unfortunately, believe me, I have my fingers crossed. I want this fight to happen. I'm right there with you all. We all want this fight. No one doesn't want this fight. We all want this fight to happen. I just don't think it happens. The UFC does not respond well to big names in the organization trying to big league them, trying to create leverage, trying to strong arm them, and they will stand firm, on business. That's how the UFC has always been. They've done that with Nate Diaz. They've done it with Conor McGregor. They've done it with Jorge Masvidal. UFC doesn't really budge for much unless they really want something to happen. Look at the Ngannou situation. Look at situations they've had with past fighters. The UFC doesn't like when guys try to create a situation to where, I have leverage, because at the end of the day, John kind of has leverage, man. He should have already fought Aspinall. They shouldn't have even have done the Stipe fight, right? But Dana wants it, the UFC wants it, and the entire fan base, as well as Aspinall, wants the Jones fight. Everybody wants it. So what does that mean? John Jones is like, everybody wants this. You're going to give me whatever the hell I want, or this doesn't happen, and everybody wants to see it. So it adds pressure to the UFC. And a lot of the time, the UFC doesn't care really what anyone thinks, right? And I get all that, but it creates pressure. John has leverage here. It pisses off the UFC, and I think that there's some jousting going on back and forth, and that's why I'm like, I just don't know that this happens. It's the biggest risk of Jones's career, and he knows it. That's why he said, I need FU money to take this fight. He knows Aspinall's a young, hungry guy who, if he goes out there and is the guy to KO John Jones, which I think there's a very good shot of that, The UFC's investment basically goes into Tom Aspinall, to where if Aspinall KOs Jones, he becomes a megastar, huge star at that point. If you finish John Jones or just let alone beat him, that would be absolutely crazy. So it would pay off in terms of that investment. And then if Jones wins, Dana can sit up there and be like, I told everybody John Jones is the pound for pound #1 guy and, the most badass fighter ever. All that bullshit, right? So essentially, it's a win-win no matter what, other than the fact that they would have to really shell out the racks to get John Jones to take the fight. But at this point, Aspinall goes out there, starches Curtis Blades, defends an interim title, which is an absolute disgrace, absolutely terrible that we have a guy defending an interim title. They've held up the heavyweight division long enough for Johnny Bones Jones, right? Move on. Aspinall's in his prime. Let's get this guy another fight. Let's get the heavyweight division moving. And I understand that heavyweight is lacking, which is why another reason John has a very strong case and very much leverage here is because heavyweight's so ass right now. But we can't waste Aspinall's prime. He is right in the mix of things. He's getting it going. Get him in a rhythm, man. Get this guy defending the title. Get him out there doing these things. Start building that resume. Get him going. Let's focus on Tom Aspinall. And if we can't get this done with John Jones, fuck it, move on. Tired of it. The star problem issue. This is something that we're hearing a lot of now, right? We've heard Ariel Helwani. We hear people talking about this. The UFC just isn't what it used to be, man, right? We're hearing all that. The UFC isn't the same. We don't have these mega stars. We don't have these guys that are basically celebrities, right? And I got some guys on here, like Conor McGregor is obviously one of the first people that's going to come to mind, who essentially, in a way, became bigger than the UFC, right? Whether you like Conor or not, he is someone that had a huge impact on the UFC becoming as big as it is, right? Going out there, boxing, Floyd Mayweather, all those different things. He's a celebrity, right? He's not just a fighter. He's a celebrity. He's an actor. He's doing all these different things. And then along the way, Khabib became a massive star as well. Nate Diaz is a massive star with a crazy fan base. Masvidal, when he went on that run, when he beat Till, Askren, and, Nate Diaz, he became a massive star. John Jones, even though it's, he's not super active right now, he's still a massive star. And then we had Brock Lesnar, right? And there's maybe some other people I'm forgetting. The point is this. What do specifically Nate Diaz and a guy like Conor McGregor, because Khabib retired on top, right? He's just like, I'm 29-0, and he's like, I'm retired, I'm going to focus, my father passed away, I'm going to focus on my team, I'm done fighting, I made a promise to my mom. That is Khabib's angle, completely respectful, and that's what Khabib is doing. So the difference with these other guys, they're still active, right? Jorge Masvidal saying he wants to fight again. Khabib, it's off the table, he's retired, he's not coming back. Brock Lesnar basically retired. John Jones is still around. Masvidal's still in the wings, which he doesn't have the same star power. Nate and Conor. What's my point? These guys make people stop what they're doing to tune in to watch the fight. Do we have anyone in the UFC right now that exactly brings that to the table? Maybe not, right? We have guys that are huge names and they're getting there, but I believe that the UFC wants controlled superstars. They want controlled stars. Here's what I mean. Conor McGregor is someone that essentially became bigger than the sport. What does that mean? Yeah, we know he's a celebrity and all these different things. Conor essentially has leverage. He can strong arm the UFC. He could be like, well, I'm not fighting. You're going to just give me more. I know that there's a contract. He could be difficult because people are going to constantly ask, when's Conor fighting? When's he fighting? When's he fighting? Nate Diaz, another guy that, yes, it's kind of dampened a little bit because he, lost to Jake Paul. He's been boxing, all those different things. He's still a massive star that brings in all sorts of different fans, casuals, people who are old school, who don't really maybe are as tuned into the UFC anymore. These guys bring out something different, right? And Nate Diaz, he's a massive star, as well as Masvidal when he was on the run. But what started to happen was these guys basically started to say F you to the boss. I'm basically talking about Jones, Masvidal, Diaz, and McGregor, to where they're like, I want more money. And not only that, they're not very active, right? How active has Conor McGregor been? Not very active, right? Since becoming a huge star. Nate Diaz, even when he became a huge star, there was a time where after the second McGregor fight, he didn't fight for a couple years. He just ducked away, right? Masvidal went on that quick tear of that 3-fight streak and then sat out, stepped in on short notice against Usman, sat out for an extended period of time waiting for Usman again, waited forever for the Covington fight. John Jones has been in and out, right? These guys are inactive. I'm talking about, the group here, right? And not Khabib, he's retired, but I'm saying These are the massive stars that we've kind of had over the past, right? And these guys like McGregor, Diaz, Masvidal, and Jones, they try to strong arm the UFC, and the UFC doesn't respond well to that. So I believe the UFC wants controlled superstars. They want controlled stars to where they're going to build fighters, but I think that they are trying to, and this is again speculation, this is my opinion, I think that they are trying to control it. They don't want a Nate Diaz, a Conor McGregor, a Masvidal when he was on that streak. They don't want guys to get so big that they can get, they'll get yes, it helps the UFC, of course, but they don't want these guys that sit around and are like, well, I'm just going to sit out and not fight for a couple years. I got plenty of money. The fans all want to see me fight no matter what. And they kind of put the UFC in a situation where the UFC, it seems like they're saying, look, we have big names like Ilia, Islam, Alex Pereira, Hamzat, Aspinall. Like, these are just some examples, right? Merab's on the rise here, even though I don't really like Merab. They're on the rise, right? They're building these guys up. They're cutting the promos. They're helping, elevate their stardom. But it seems like they are trying to control it to where they still keep these guys hungry enough and under the thumb of the UFC to still be active enough to not, take one fight, and sit out, have to vacate a title, wait 2 years, come back. The UFC is trying to prevent that. That's what it seems to me. We will not, I don't think, see a massive fight where we get a big name in the UFC, go do a boxing match like we saw with Conor and Floyd. I think that was a bit of an anomaly. Maybe they, because Dana's doing, the TKO boxing stuff and whatever, maybe we see something there. But I think that the UFC is trying to control the stardom. That's what I think. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm reaching. That's what it seems like to me. And I know that Islam, Topuria, these guys are big stars. They have big followings on social media. I get it. But I think that they are trying to build them to where it's beneficial to the fighter, to the UFC, but trying to cap it and not put these guys in a position like a Conor McGregor, like a Nate Diaz, like a John Jones, to where they can strong arm the UFC and have this kind of leverage. They want good employees who will show up, fight a couple times a year, just like the UFC asks, and not be in this position to where they're like, I'm just going to sit out for 2 years. And I'm not saying that these guys, I don't know, the financials behind the scenes, and these guys don't strike me as the type to just sit out. They seem like they're guys who want to be active and continue to keep it going. I'm just saying, I think the UFC has learned along the way what can happen if guys get become too big of a star. And I think that they are trying to build these guys, but not let them get too big. That's my take. Maybe I'm wrong, but I find it hard to believe that you're the biggest combat sports promotion of all time. You've built these massive stars, and now we're looking around going, well, why don't we have any stars? It's not like all of a sudden they forgot how to build a star. That's why I'm like, it seems like it could be a little bit intentional. I know you might say, well, these guys aren't Conor. These guys aren't Nate. They're not Habib. They're not whatever. Yeah, maybe that's true, but they're still badass fighters, man. The UFC's as big as it's ever been. They pump promotion behind it, but it seems like in a way they're just trying to control it, right? That's just what it seems like to me. And then this here. Stop pushing the BS star issue, right? And perfect example, I know I'm ripping on him a little bit here, is Sean O'Malley. Sean O'Malley is a spectacular fighter. Without question, very, very skilled. One of the best strikers in the organization, in the sport right now. Without question, in my opinion. He's a former champion. He's spectacular. He is not a superstar, and he is never going to be a superstar, in my opinion, right? Maybe he is, unless they give him some big boxing match or whatever. They look at Sean O'Malley, and this is the ideal guy for the UFC right now. Someone that's got a flashy style, appeals to an audience that's maybe not a super hardcore UFC fan, the little kids that are video gaming online or little weirdos out there. That is almost the Sean O'Malley push. He is almost a dollar store version of like a Conor McGregor. Someone who's going to try to talk trash even though he can. He's got the personality of a wet mop. It seems like they have O'Malley here. They're like, he's got the flashy style. He's someone that no matter what happens, we can control Sean O'Malley. We have him under our thumb. He's not going to say F you to the man like Nate does, like Conor does, like John Jones is basically doing what seems like right now. The UFC likes a guy like a Sean O'Malley, someone that they can force the issue, try to force him down our throats like an Alex Pereira. I know Alex is a big star. He's a very talented fighter. But the UFC says, can you step up? And he goes, absolutely. Anytime, any place, which you have to respect about Poatan. But these other guys like Jones, Diaz, even Masvidal on that run. And then now you have, McGregor. I'm using those guys as examples because those who are looked at as those massive celebrity-like stars who would be like, nah, it's going to be on my terms. I'm going to do what I want. If I want to sit out for a year or two, whatever, that's what's going to be. I think the UFC is trying to prevent that. And part of that, I kind of get to a degree, but I'm just calling out the aspect of everyone saying we have this star issue. I think part of it might be intentional by the UFC. And last but not least, Dana White. I believe Dana White is distracted, right? And I know that this isn't some like crazy take. This isn't something crazy that I'm discovering here. A lot of us have come to the realization of realizing that Dana, like I said in the beginning of the video, he's almost like a Joe Rogan at this point. They're OGs of the sport. They've done so much for it, and it wouldn't be where it is today without them probably, right? They've done so many great things, but they're doing so many other things outside of the UFC and outside of fighting that they've almost became out of touch with what the current audience wants, what the current audience sees. Like they think a matchup, especially Dana, of Jones versus Stipe in 2024 is a badass fight. It isn't. Maybe a few years before that it would be, but not in 2024 where Stipe's 40-some years old and John Jones is, we have Aspinall in the wings. Like, no. Right? So Dana's this guy that almost has this false reality when it comes to these fights. And a lot of that is just, he's distracted, right? He's doing power slap that nobody gives a shit about. He's kind of doing the UFC. He's over here doing TKO boxing stuff with Turkey Al-Sheikh. And, there's all these different things, which it's all very cool, right? And I know Dana's really put his time in with the UFC and he's moving on to do other stuff. And he's hanging out with influencers and doing all this other shit. He just seems so distracted that he doesn't have a full heartbeat on what the UFC is doing right now. And I know TKO coming in, I'm sure that, at the end of the day, Dana has this mentality of I call the shots and F you and I'm that guy. I think he was at one point to where now I just feel like Dana's answering to somebody, obviously, right? There's other people behind the scenes involved with TKO and whoever it might be that seem like they are telling Dana and the UFC what we are basically going to be doing. We all kind of understand that at this point from the various different things that have been going on. I'm concerned, man. I'm concerned. I get it's exciting with the boxing with Turkey Al-Sheikh. Turkey's been doing some really good things with boxing. Power slap is fucking stupid. The UFC is the bread and butter. It's the biggest combat sports promotion. It's the one that we all love and we all hope can keep delivering moving forward, but it's heading in a very rough direction. The big fights aren't coming to fruition. We just have disasters all over the place. We don't have these big stars like we used to, which again, it's a little bit more balanced. Instead of relying on one or two guys to get really excited, we have multiple, maybe they're not the huge megastar, but it's very well balanced. So there's a little bit of a trade-off. But Dana White refuses to promote some of these guys on the rise. They beat an OG or a guy that he really likes or a big name, and Dana just talks about those guys at the press conference instead of building up Imavov after he finishes Adesanya, instead of building up DDP after beating Sean Strickland in an absolute masterclass. Like he's missing on these opportunities to promote like a Magomed Ankalaev after he beat Alex Pineda, who has basically like a record breaking, at least for the year, right? In terms of the belt wrapping, which was the last time I checked, it was over 25 million views. So he's missing on opportunities to promote the up and coming guys in the organization. And I think at this point, he needs to get a better grip on what's going on in the UFC because right now, things are chaotic. They're a disaster. The UFC needs to get these big fights booked. They need to figure it out. And like I was saying before, maybe the TV deal has something to do with that. They're waiting to put some of these big fights together, given that ESPN has shown that, at least ESPN Plus, they can't really be trusted. They got issues with the pay-per-views and all that different stuff. Maybe. I don't know, but I'm concerned. Hopefully the UFC figures it out.